All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to wait a couple of minutes for the room to fill up. We see a lot of people joining, so we'll leave you with this photograph just to kind of stare into and meditate on for a couple of minutes. All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 6th in our series of free webinars. My name is Scott Perkins, and I'm the Fallingwater's Director of Preservation and Collections. And I'm joined today by my colleagues Ashley Andrukovich, who's our Curator of Education, and Rebecca Hagan, our Registrar, who will be following the Q&A and chat windows during the presentation. So feel free, as questions pop up throughout today's talk, to ask them in those two chat rooms, and we'll regroup after the presentation to do a Q&A for the last 10 minutes or so. Oh, we have a slide advance issue here. There we go. Following the close of today's webinar, you'll be able to view it and the 5 others in the series via Fallingwater's website. Our new virtual experiences page you see on the left there will lead you to Fallingwater from Home, a selection of virtual tours, activities for kids and families, and a new portal to our collections database that you see on the right there, which offers a place for you to learn more about the artwork and furniture on display in Fallingwater. Those of you who visited Fallingwater undoubtedly know that the Kaufman family filled their country house with a variety of decorative and fine art objects, including works in textiles, ceramics, glass, and metal, as well as numerous paintings, sculpture, and works on paper. Edgar Kaufman Jr., who's the gentleman here in the blue shirt shown here on the West Terrace with his partner Paul Mayen and Paul's sister Flores in 1957, carried on his parents' vision for Fallingwater, including determining the placement of artwork within and outside of the house. Kaufman donated Fallingwater to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy in 1963 and continued his curatorial oversight until his death in 1989. And indeed, the placement of objects in and around Fallingwater are kept much to the way that he intended, a nod to preserving his wish that Fallingwater be a place of education, where visitors learn from its art, architecture, and design. However, maintaining the artwork in Fallingwater is ongoing, and in a year filled with challenges, much of our historic preservation and conservation work has been put on hold. So if you are a friend of Fallingwater and with us today, we thank you for your support, and it's because of members like you that we're able to continue to care for our collection. You'll hear about the conservation of outdoor sculpture today, but our speaker is just one of a core of conservators we draw upon on a regular basis. Fallingwater's paintings have been conserved in the past 5 years, with each piece cleaned or repaired, and if needed, protected with conservation glazing. These types of deep conservation efforts are then monitored throughout our annual inspections conducted by our registrar. The conservation of this 18th century painting from the Peruvian Chesco School of Artists, for example, included replacing a portion of its canvas before it's returned to the house, where it continues to greet visitors as they ascend the stairs to the second floor. Specialists in smaller works of art help us with pieces such as this 15th century Flemish polychrome wood Madonna in child sculpture, whose flaking paint has raised the cause for concern. Displayed in the master bedroom, it's among our visitors' most favorite pieces, yet the precision of work such as this, and for the painting we just saw, often means that artwork temporarily leaves our site for a short amount of time. But larger pieces, such as our Frank Lloyd Wright designed dining table, are more difficult to remove, and larger tasks such as painstakingly readhering paper-thin layers of walnut veneer must be done while the piece remains on site. And these, I'm sure you will agree, are heroic efforts. Well, today, one of those heroes is with us, Constance Stromberg, who in 2017 began a 2-year conservation project to care for all of Fallingwater's outdoor sculptures. She has an amazing, diverse background in the field for clients around the world. And since she plans to share some of those stories with you, I'll leave it to her to tell you all about them, and ask you then to just join me in welcoming Connie Stromberg. So Connie, I will stop sharing and leave this to you to share your screen.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I am going to talk, as Scott said, about the outdoor sculpture at Fallingwater, and just starting with, here's a beautiful view, which you've probably seen many times, but I wanted to give a little bit of background about my training and a little bit of what I've done in my career. So people who don't have an understanding of what's involved in art conservation can have an idea of how you train in the field. So I got my undergraduate degree at Carnegie Mellon in sculpture, and then I did a 2-year apprenticeship at the Johnson Atelier bronze casting foundry, which was a really amazing experience, and I learned a lot about bronze casting and finishing and patination. And then I did also find out about conservation while I was working at the foundry, and found out what I had to do to get into grad school. And so I spent another 2 years working on that. And I had a great experience working at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. And I had to take material science courses, and I got into school at the Winterthur University of Delaware Conservation Training Program. And this photograph shows one of the summer work projects I was fortunate enough to participate in. I was with the National Park Service in the Washington area, and we worked on the Iwo Jima sculpture, but this is back in 1984. And so I think it's been treated since then. And you can see that there's very little safety equipment, if none, but now I'm sure everyone wears harnesses. And here I am working, and we worked with 8 Marines to clean and coat the bronze. And then after my training at Winterthur, I did a 4th year at the Smithsonian Institution in the Conservation Analytical Lab. And we moved to, abroad because my husband worked for USAID for 14 years. We were in 4 different countries, and it was a great experience. But then it was time to come home, because every time we moved, I had to find new work. And while we were in Nepal, I did some training at the Department of Archaeology, and also worked to help set up a museum of bronze art, where the recovered small bronzes that people tried to take out of the country were put to be exhibited in the Patan Durbar Square Museum. And just, I could talk at great length about all the work I did overseas, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of different projects. When we were in Ecuador, I worked in a Baroque church on, they had had a fire, and I helped them try to consolidate the burned wood on these cherubs that unfortunately did have their upper layers burned, and they were all removed from the cupola there, and now they've all been reinstalled. This is in the 90s, so I haven't been back, but I heard they were all reinstalled. And then we moved back in 2001, and I started my business, and I work in the Washington, Baltimore area. Sometimes I travel, but like to Fallingwater, and but mostly there's a lot of work in this area, and I work on decorative arts and historic objects and sculptures. I work at some of the Smithsonian museums and for other government institutions. This is the mace from the House of Representatives, and it's made of silver and ebony. And then here's a Calder mobile stable from a private collection. And this whale skeleton is at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. And I do believe it's the largest object I've ever worked on. I think it's taller than Iwo Jima. So that's just a little bit about my background, but I now will start on the part about Fallingwater. And in 2017, Rebecca Hagan, the registrar at Fallingwater, contacted me and asked me to come and conduct an assessment of all of the outdoor sculpture at Fallingwater. And it was a beautiful day, and it was a Wednesday, so it wasn't open, which was great. And many of you probably already know this information, and also Scott reviewed it as well. Just a little bit about Fallingwater. It's in the Laurel Highlands of Western Pennsylvania, and was completed in 1939. And it is one of the most recognized buildings in the US. And it was, along with 7 other Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, declared a World Heritage Site in 2019 after a long effort by the staff there. In the 60s, as Scott said, the property was turned over to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy by Edgar Kaufman Jr., son of the Pittsburgh department store Kaufmans, who had commissioned Wright to build Fallingwater as their country house. And now they have surpassed 6 million visitors since they opened. And staff has maintained the property and the buildings very well over the years. But more recently, professional care of the collections has been given more attention. So I just wanted to, I'm going to talk about the individual treatment of these pieces, but this just shows some of the pieces where they're all over the site, some outside, some on terraces, some indoors, but just wait, back to that one. You can see that this sculpture is in this little, on the top of this wall under this overhang there. And just to mention that they are everywhere. A little bit of a background, a review of sculpture in an outdoor environment, especially an environment like at Fallingwaters, the Laurel Highlands are very wet, and there are a lot of storms and snow and ice. Weather has a very big impact on all kinds of materials when they're outdoors. And cracks form and then expand because of ice in the crack. And humid conditions, again, more at Fallingwater because it's often very wet there, promote biogrowth, such as lichens and algae, and they form on just about any material you can think of. And corrosion of metals is accelerated by the humid conditions. And you might not think that pollution would play a big part in the country, but it does travel acidic gases from coal and factories, and car exhaust travels all over and it causes acid rain. In other words, the pH of the rain is more acidic, and that causes worse corrosion of metals and alloys. And then wind causes abrasive particles. Even just pollen is abrasive, and coatings wear, and the surface wears faster in some areas than others because of wind direction and dew from overnight moisture. And it's just an endless cycle of the sculptures having issues with the outdoor environment. This just shows how a sculpture in Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore, the condition before we treated it, you can see how the corrosion forms. There are black and green areas and streaking, and we cleaned and coated it, but that has to be maintained because the coatings will wear. And this is a stone lantern at Anderson House in the Society of the Cincinnati in DuPont Circle in Washington. And it had been indoors, but then was moved to their garden. There's a pair of them, and you can see the snow, but also the green areas are, that's biogrowth. And also you can see this crack across the center. This pair of lanterns was cleaned and stabilized and disassembled, and then moved back inside where it had originally been. They had been displayed, and that was a big project, but it's basically stopped the deterioration, which would have continued outdoors. There are some major challenges of caring for buildings and grounds at Fallingwater. As I mentioned, the dampness and the storms and moisture gets in cracks, and it's a long list, and it affects all different materials, and which is why there are staff members at Fallingwater who spend all their time dealing with the buildings and repointing and repairing cracks. You can see this is the bridge that well, these visitors are standing on this bridge. It's from the other side, and this is a photo from 1962. You can see the crack across it there, and the stairs down to the bear run from the living room. And then here is the mother and child figure on the plunge pool retaining wall. And here's another view from basically the side of the stairs, and you can see the spalling off surface from the bridge, and this is from 2018. So it's just never ending. This is a bird's eye view of where the sculptures are located on the property. And as I said before, Rebecca and I did a tour of all the different sculptures, and well, I'll talk about that in a minute, but I photographed them all. But you can see some of them are on terraces, and others are just out on the property. And these are all where the Kaufmans placed them and wanted to see them when they were there. So it's very important to leave them where they were placed by the Kaufmans, because this is an historic house, and the history of the house is important to everything about it. So for my assessment, I walked around on a day when no one was there, which was just such a privilege for me. I loved being there. I'd been there twice before, once when I was in college, and then just a month before I went to do this assessment. We just walked around and talked to the housekeeping staff about what they did for the sculptures and some anecdotes about what had happened over the years. And I took pictures of everything and made notes. And then I went back to my office, and I wrote up a treatment plan and a work schedule. And so in 2018, we made 3 trips. I went with 2 colleagues, or one each trip, but Howard Wellman and Diane Fullick, and we made these 3 trips and worked on everything except for 2 sculptures that were brought to me by Scott Perkins and another staff member so that I could work on them in my studio over the winter. And one of them is this cast concrete figure of Serena, the actress who played her in Porgy and Bess. And it is concrete, and it has been waxed for many years with black wax by Fallingwater staff. But you can see where I took off some of the wax, and I'm not sure you can tell from this photograph, but the aggregate is proud of the surface. And what I think that shows is that it was probably uncoated for several years and the concrete itself was wearing away. And I believe the black wax was originally, I mean, it's just a theory, I don't know for sure, but it was probably done to, try to protect the surface. But once it's been waxed, you can't really switch to another coating or do anything else to it because the wax would penetrate into the concrete. So this is from the day before I treated it, and it was, you can see these areas where the wax had been flaking off because the moisture from below is absorbed up into the concrete and then starts the wax cracking off. It's really not a material intended as a protective coating for concrete. But it was meant to be that way. This is the history of the piece. So I did reapply a black microcrystalline wax. And as far as I know, it needs treatment again. And the other sculpture that was brought to me in my studio is this Peter Voulkos ceramic piece that had unfortunately been knocked over by a visitor in the 70s, I believe. And it was sent back to Voulkos's studio to repair the 3 pieces that had been broken off when it was knocked over. And they did not glaze the surface or color the surface of the replacement pieces. You can see this lighter colored piece there, and they just sort of puttied them back on. And so periodically they need to be stabilized, and the paint flakes off those restorations, and it needed to be toned again. And another problem again is with moisture. There's a lot of moisture and it gets wicked up inside the sculpture. The bottom of this piece is ceramic, and it has just a couple of holes in it. So because of the wood also, which is very absorbent too, it stays wet inside, and that is what promotes the flaking to happen on the restorations. So in my studio, I carved out the older putty. I didn't carve it all the way out, but I took the surface off and put mortar there that I thought would be more compatible to the ceramic. And then I toned the restorations with a material that I had hoped would be more durable outdoors, but again, that is starting to flake and needs to be retreated. So we're always looking for materials that work better and try to solve problems with these materials. So if it gets done again, hopefully it will be with a mineral silicate paint that bonds better and allows moisture to pass through it on the next go round. So this treatment that I'm about to talk about is the most dramatic, and this is the mother and child Lipchitz sculpture that is on the wall of the plunge pool here that you've already seen in several photographs. And before I went for the assessment in 2017, there had been a big storm and some logs in Bear Run. You can see the river is very high and moving fast, rammed the wall and broke the wall, and then the sculpture was knocked over. And it remained there all night, kind of scraping against the plunge pool wall, but it remained there because a chain had been installed when it was knocked over in 1956, and it had gone down the river quite a ways, and it had to be recovered by Fallingwater staff. And then it was at that time sent back to the Lipchitz, Lipchitz's foundry, and they repaired it. This time they asked me to come and look at it, and when I saw it in 2017, it was already placed face down in the empty plunge pool, so I couldn't really see the front. But then Rebecca sent me photographs, and you can see areas that had been scraped when it was hanging over the stone wall. So, you know, there are different options to trying to repair something like a bronze sculpture that has fallen over and been scraped. Of course, the perfect solution would have been sending it to a foundry and filling those scraped areas with bronze, with welded bronze, and then chasing them to be level with the surface detail, and then repatinating them. But that would be much more expensive. And so we proposed if they could erect a good platform with mesh surrounding it to cut down on the wind, that I could try to clean off old wax and spot patinate the scraped areas. So this was the first work we did in 2018, and they built us a great platform, enclosed platform, and we were able to put a tarp over the top to keep rain out, because it did rain some while we were there. And there's Howard Wellman heating the surface for coating it with wax. And it also kept us separated from visitors. We could hear them, but we couldn't see them, so we could concentrate on our work. And here are the steps, basic steps of, there's Howard washing the sculpture, which was very dirty at that point because it had been in the plunge pool. And we use solvents and plastic scrubber pads to reduce old wax coatings. And then I was using a chemical patina sprayed on the surface while I heated the surface with a propane torch. And you can see here that these are the areas that had been bare bronze, and they were colored brown, which then allows the wax, after it was waxed, you really couldn't see those scraped areas. And we did show the director and the staff 3 possibilities of how to coat the surface. And the problem with a pigmented coating is that it's not as uniform over the surface and wouldn't protect it quite as long, so it might need maintenance sooner. And we all thought it looked fine with a clear wax coating, so that was what was chosen. And here it is after treatment, and we were happy with the results. And also, one of the stonemasons did apply mortar around the base there to try to hold it in place better. I wish that, you know, in a perfect world, it would have an amount that is independent of the wall so that it doesn't get knocked over if the wall is damaged. And here, these are my recommendations for what should be done in terms of taking care of this, because it basically needs ongoing maintenance, and it's basically a matter of cost, that the funds have to be there to be able to take care of the sculpture. And you can see this is the shot I always take of something that is half wax. It's very dramatic. The wax saturates the bronze and really brings it to life. It doesn't completely hide the green corrosion, but it makes the form much more readable. So next time, I think it should be completely stripped of old wax coatings and then re-waxed, and then it's a matter of taking care of it on a rotating cyclical maintenance basis to keep that wax coating clean, and then reapply it when green corrosion spots start to appear. And as I just mentioned, I really hope that at some point a professional mount maker can be brought in to recommend how to mount it so that it's not knocked over if there's other damage from falling trees. I'm going to run through a couple more of the treatments we did, and this is also by Lipchitz, and it was outdoors for a while. You can see it is now in Edgar Jr.'s bedroom area, but you can see the vertical streaking that happens from exposure to acid rain and just outdoor exposure from the water running down the bronze. But it was brought in several years ago, and we took it apart off the wooden base, and we discovered that there was the sensor for, security sensor had been installed on this carved wood, and it fit very nicely inside, but you can see the bright green corrosion caused by the acids in the wood. So Diane made this barrier that looks sort of like a fedora, but it fits right over the wood and inside there. And so it should really stop the corrosion forming on the interior of the metal. And then we cleaned and coated it with heat, with wax to protect it. And this piece, since it's indoors, basically just needs to be dusted and inspected yearly, but it shouldn't need waxing anytime soon unless the conditions in the house change. But I don't think it's going to rain in the house, so should be fine. This is the cast iron Buddha head that has been out for a very long time, and cast iron is difficult in this environment. It has had some problems with thinning, and we found some chips inside. You can see here's Diane using just a long dowel with some tape on the end to pull out some of the chips from the inside. Basically, this piece, I recommend that it be put indoors. I understand that this is where the Kaufmans wanted it, but at least make a cover for it. Or, it could be brought in the winter when the house isn't open, but it's really affected by the weather. And wax is not it's not really meant to be a protective coating for iron. It wears too quickly, and the rust starts anyway. This sculpture is mixed metals, and it has also a cast iron area here, and that you can see both biological growth and iron rust corrosion on it. And then there are also aluminum and brass parts, and I looked at it again in October 2017, and then when I came back to work the first time, it had someone had fallen on it, a visitor had fallen on it, and so we brought in some iron workers, which I'll talk about in a minute, but we tried to straighten that arm out without damaging the metal at all. And here they are. There's a place near Fallingwater called Touchstone Center for Crafts, and they brought their oxyacetylene torch, and we tried to sort of anneal these areas where we thought that we might be able to bend the arm back to how it was supposed to be. We bent it some, but we kept working with tools to try to straighten it. But it's a very complicated connection with some brazed areas, and I stopped the process after a few times because I just thought that it did look better, but it was time to stop. The most important thing was that we were able to move the sculpture. It had been here where against this wall, and visitors walked in and maybe didn't notice it as much. So it was moved to this far wall, and this way people had a chance when they came out onto the terrace to see it from a distance first. So I think it's much better placed now. And we cleaned and coated the metal. Here you can see the cast iron is half waxed down there. So these tough stone sculptures from a Mexican artist were purchased by Mrs. Kaufman by the Kaufmans when they traveled in Mexico. They loved his work, and there are three of them, and they have their own problems. This one in particular has, you can see the erosion, broken off parts. Unfortunately, it must have been knocked over, and this hat was reattached with some adhesive that then yellowed. And let's see, here you can see where water pools in this center part. And so then biogrowth is promoted on the surface, and which also causes erosion. So here is Howard is spraying D2 biocide on the surface, which keeps the biogrowth, it kills it and it keeps it at bay, even outdoors, for 6 to 12 months. And when I was there in 2017, I did a test which really showed that it would work. And so Fallingwater staff sponges out the water periodically and tries to keep these clean. And here are the other two Magana pieces. And you can see this one has this green biogrowth, and then after treatment that has been removed. And I haven't seen them for a while, so I don't know how it's doing now, but periodic treatment with the D2 will keep that from happening. And this is the sculpture that is under the overhang on the pathway to the guest house. And even though it was in better condition because of the overhang, it still had some biogrowth, and we cleaned that as well. This is the fourth Magana sculpture. It's a wood sculpture that is on a patio, and it's a covered patio, but the rain comes from behind because it's open there, and it actually, the water pools, you can see debris and water in the back, and it stays pretty wet back there. So even on the wood, you get this biological growth, and the base really absorbs water. You can see that here. And it has been repaired in the past. I believe this part was added. We cleaned on the interior. We pulled out a lot of debris, and we used trying to treat the rot in the wood. We did a test with the Boracare, which is a rot treatment, and it does darken the wood, so we only used it in sort of recesses. And my hope is that that patio will be kept drier, and if it's in a drier area with better ventilation, that should be improved. The rot should be slowed down. This is the bronze sculpture that is on the gravel driveway right before the bridge to the house, and the gravel unfortunately gets kicked up by vehicles and pedestrians, and so the lower area gets little tiny pieces of gravel hitting it. And the wax was a little bit flaky. It might have been applied cold. Sometimes that happens with cold wax. They don't penetrate the surface of the bronze as well and get into the pores of the metal. So we did clean and wax this sculpture. I gave pretty extensive conservation maintenance recommendations, but sometimes they're aspirational. Again, if the funds, the facilities budget has to include that money and for maintenance. And this is a problem at historic houses everywhere, and in private collections and in museums. It's just not sexy. So it's not necessarily something that goes into the budget. So I just, staff can rinse and wash as long as they use mild detergent, just a few drops, and no metal ferrules on brushes, just use plastic bristles or lint-free cloths, and can clean the sculptures. I'd say 4 times a year is good. And a professional conservator should be brought in every couple of years. Some things can go 3 or 4 years without being treated, but as long as they're washed to keep the debris off the surface. And again, wax coatings build up after some time, and they are also deteriorated. The coatings themselves just don't last. So every 12 to 15 years, they should be completely removed and started over. And again, ferrous metals like cast iron or steel, they really can suffer in this environment, and coatings don't work as well. So they should really be cleaned and coated a little bit more often, every 12 to 18 months. And stone should be cleaned, and if there are biogrowth problems, they can be treated with D2, not too often, but when you start seeing the green. And if staff keeps them clean and pooling water at a minimum, then that should help too. And some of them would benefit from better bases to let the insides, if they're hollow, to let them air out better. Also, covers can be helpful in the winter months. And here you can see the cover that Fallingwater has for the Voulkos sculpture, which is next to the guest house pool. And that does help because you can see the heavy snow, but it still keeps moisture inside. So this kind of cover, Howard Wellman had ordered this for a private collector's Richard Serra sculpture. And it's been on there a couple of years and it works really well. It did need to be adapted because the top and the bottom sections, sometimes there was a gap there. So Howard has adapted that cover. And these are expensive, but they are very good. And I believe Fallingwater is looking into getting some covers made. So I just want to say thank you. It has been such a privilege to be able to work at Fallingwater, and I would go back anytime. And Justin and Scott and Rebecca are they work hard in their jobs, and they do as much as they can to take care of the place. And you can donate at this site, and it would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Connie. And I'll let you catch your breath for a minute before the Q&A, but I wanted to remind everybody that this webinar will also be available on our website under the Virtual Experiences tab on fallingwater.org. And there'll also be information there if you're interested in being a friend of Fallingwater and that membership program using this link shown on Connie's last slide. So I'm going to turn this over to Ashley, who's been moderating the chat and the Q&A windows to see what questions are out there and have Connie answer them. So thank you.
Yeah, some really great questions came through, and the one that I'd like to start with is, when did you discover your passion for conservation? Was it always clear, or did it develop over the course of your education?
Well, it's a good question because I had never heard of the field of conservation while I was a sculpture student. And when I graduated from Carnegie Mellon, I had no idea what I would do. And I did discover the Johnson Atelier Foundry. And then while I was there, I was asked to help on the conservation maintenance at the Princeton University outdoor collection. And I was fascinated by this work, and it seemed like a really good fit. So I looked into what I could do to apply to grad school, which really seemed like the right way to go because it involves a lot of practical training as well as the material science that you need to know for taking care of artworks and how they deteriorate. And so that was it for me. That was my launch. And it did take me a while to get into school, to prepare and get into school, but that was it. I haven't stopped liking this work a lot.
Yeah, do you have any advice for any students who might be watching who are thinking about going into this field as a career?
Well, you have to be really focused on and realizing that it's going to take a lot to get into grad school. It's competitive, but also there's not a lot of jobs. And if you're the kind of person who can work independently, I mean, fortunately, I'm fortunate to have my husband's health insurance, so I don't have to worry about those kinds of things. But if you're starting on your own, it's it's not, it's daunting because museum pay is not great. That's a big discussion in the field. And I just think that people should really look into what you have to do. And you have to, all the courses you have to have. My last course, my only science course was biology in high school. I had no chemistry. So you have to really have your goal in mind and be pretty focused on that. And of course, this is back in my day. Yes, you needed experience, but I think now they need like 400 hours of museum or conservation training, pre-program they call it, and that's a big discussion out there. Is sometimes those pre-program internships are not paid, and that's, I agree. I think it's wrong. You should always be paid for your work. So this is something that's a big thing in the field. And if you want to find out more about it, you can go to the American Institute for Conservation website. There are resources on that website to find out which programs, where the programs are, and what you need to do to get in.
Great.
Yeah.
So can you talk about how long it took you to work on the restoration of Mother and Child?
We worked for 4 days. We were also doing a little bit of other work. Sometimes, like after you apply the patina chemical, for example, it has to sit overnight so that you can remove the excess the next day. So it was 4 days of work, but with some going away from it during those 4 days and doing other things.
So this next question is related to a specific product. Products such as wood epoxy have been used for conservation at Monticello. Have you considered those for use on wooden elements at Fallingwater? And this may be a question for Rebecca as well.
Should I go first, Rebecca, or do you want to take that one?
Well, I think if we're talking about the structural and architectural elements of the house, we don't really have much wood. And Scott oversees our preservation work, so he could speak to that. But this Magana sculpture is our only wooden sculpture outdoors. So Connie, you're clearly the expert on that one.
Well, you probably noticed the vertical cracks in it, and I would not fill that vertical crack unless it was making the sculpture structurally unstable. Because the wood is going to shrink and expand, having to do with the season since it's outdoors. And if it isn't unstable, I wouldn't use it. If it did need fills, wood epoxy is a fine product. Mostly my concern is the moisture and trying to keep the rot at bay and keeping it dry. And I didn't mention this, we put a couple of strips of something called Tyvar, which is a inert plastic material, of very thin strips underneath it to try to allow some air circulation, but it's really not enough. It should come up a little bit higher and have a better base to be able to dry out on the bottom.
Okay. This question is from a private collector. What might be an easier care starter sculptural material in which to invest? So a low maintenance exterior sculpture.
That's a good question because there is no perfect answer. I think granite is more durable, but I mean, sometimes art materials are like bronze it lends itself to a certain kind of beauty that you just can't get from other materials. So if you're just choosing by material, I think you should live in a climate that isn't detrimental to the material, or do the maintenance that's necessary. So I'm not really giving a good answer for that one. I'm sorry.
I think that was a good answer.
Okay.
Think about climate. Mm-hmm. And this next question, I think, could also be answered by both Connie and Rebecca. So this question is, how well did the Kaufmans maintain the sculptures during their lifetimes and their time in residence at Fallingwater? And a similar question that came up was whether the sculptures were selected specifically to be shown outdoors.
Rebecca, that's you. That's history there. So
I'm happy to dive in. So we have plenty of historic images of the house that show, again, this was a living, breathing, used space. So objects are moving around, not only, you know, textiles or smaller objects, but also these sculptures. So many of them did move from terraces to indoor spaces. And even in those early photographs, these objects are showing where, like that harpist Lipchitz piece that Connie worked on that had the streaks from the rain, the acid rain, and that sort of exposure is going to show up almost immediately. But we do have archival material relating to the Kaufmans, reaching out to conservators, because of course Edgar Jr. did work in the museum field. He was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, so he was very much connected to you know, the art world, object conservation, and they would repair pieces that were broken, and they would address these concerns, but it was inevitable for these outdoor pieces. But yes, it was happening if they're outdoors. Same as with the house. Maintenance started almost immediately on the structure itself, and they were in tune and helping to conserve these when possible.
Connie, can you talk about what kind of wax is best to use on a bronze sculpture?
well, I make my own from these microcrystalline waxes, but they're not really available commercially. And there are some paste waxes that are, you know, available commercially, but I'm not sure how perfect they are. Some conservators use a product called tree wax. But since I make my own, there's also Renaissance wax, which is made of microcrystalline waxes, but I believe it has other additives that it's not really something it's not really a do-it-yourself kind of thing, I guess I don't really recommend to people who don't have training to put wax on their bronze because there's just too many things that can happen.
So we'll take one more question. It's a two-part question, and I want to apologize to everyone who is submitting your questions. If we do not get to yours, I'm sorry. Everyone is asking really great questions, but I think this should be the last one for now. This question is, what is your favorite sculpture at Fallingwater, and your favorite sculpture just in general that you have worked on during your entire career so far?
Wow. Well, I do really like the mother and child. It's not the only one I like though. It's just that it's so perfect for where it's exhibited. And I believe that Wright said that it was originally facing the other way. It was facing the plunge pool. And then I guess the Kaufmans turned it around. And I just think it's like, welcome, you know, it's a beautiful piece. And so yes, that's my favorite. I don't have one sculpture. I like a lot of sculpture. I really like Hepworth and Moore, and I mean, I love Calder. I don't have one. I have to say that Fallingwater is my favorite place to have worked. So there you go. Not making it up.
I'm sure you say that to all of the sites that you work at.
Sorry. I just it's such a beautiful setting, and I've worked at a lot of different museums and in different countries, and there are many interesting projects I've worked on, really. So,
well, we feel
bronze is my favorite thing to work on. That's the last thing I'll say.
We feel very fortunate to have your expertise at Fallingwater, and it has been such a pleasure listening to you talk about your work.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Connie. Thanks, Ashley and Rebecca. And thank you, everyone. You should be receiving an email from us with a link to the webinar when it is ready to view on our website. And I hope you will check back with us for other programs we have coming up. So with that, I'll leave you and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.